The screen freezes on a single frame, Jasmine Crockett leaning forward, her eyes locked like steel, lips parted mid-sentence. Across from her, Donald Trump shifts in his chair, jaw clenched. The trademark bravado slipping into something raw, something dangerously close to panic. Beside him, Ivanka leans in, her whisper sharp enough to cut glass, her polished composure betraying the tiniest tremor of dread. In that split second, before the next word even escapes Crockett's mouth, you can feel the ground shaking beneath the political stage. Asterisk, this isn't just another cable news argument. This is a collision of worlds. On one side, a family dynasty built on spectacle, wealth, and power machine that has weathered scandal after scandal and emerged each time with its grip still intact. On the other side, a rising voice from Congress. A woman unafraid to throw off the velvet gloves and hit back with the kind of force that rattles even the most arrogant opponent. What she is about to say will not be forgotten. Asterisk, the cameras don't blink. Millions are watching, waiting. The chatter of pundits, the clatter of keyboards in newsrooms, the pulse of a nation addicted to the theater of politics, it all hangs suspended, as if the country itself is holding its breath. And in that silence, Crockett's presence grows. Larger than the studio walls, larger than the lights or the cameras, larger than the carefully scripted empire that Trump and Ivanka have worked years to maintain. Asterisk for Trump. The familiar script is faltering. The sneer, the interruption, the easy dismissal, it's not working here. His eyes dart, betraying the recognition that he is not the one in control of this moment. Ivanka's hand on his arm, her whispered strategy, feels more like a desperate tether than a confident plan. The image of invulnerability they have sold to America is cracking live in real time. Asterisk, and Crockett knows it. You can see it in her posture, in the certainty of her tone, in the way she does not flinch beneath the weight of their names or their empire. She is about to drop a revelation sharp enough to pierce through layers of spin, and once it lands, there will be no rewinding the tape. Asterisk, the countdown has already begun. And when her next words break the silence, the world watching will never be the same. Asterisk, for years, Donald Trump has thrived in the chaos of the American spotlight. He does not simply appear in the news cycle, he devours it. Every tweet, every outburst, every rally chant was designed to command attention, to set the terms of the conversation, to drown out all rivals with sheer volume. His presence became not just a political force, but a cultural storm, pulling entire networks into orbit around him. Where others worried about bad press, Trump learned to feed on it, turning scandal into momentum and outrage into loyalty. In his world, dominance was not accidental, it was engineered. Asterisk. And alongside him, Ivanka emerged as the carefully polished counterweight. Where Trump blustered, she soothed. Where he provoked, she presented the image of refinement, intelligence, and control. She was the embodiment of brand management, the one who could make the chaos seem calculated. The scandals look survivable, the dynasty appear untouchable. To the public, she was the soft voice in the storm. The daughter who reassured skeptics that beneath the rough exterior, there was sophistication and strategy. For the Trump machine, she was not simply an accessory. She was the proof of stability. The illusion of grace, asterisk, this dynamic became a kind of armor. Trump could lash out, dominate the headlines, and test the limits of scandal because Ivanka was always there to recalibrate the narrative, to remind the press that the family still exuded elegance, that the dynasty still knew how to smile for the camera. Together, they created this sense of inevitability that no matter what storm hit, the Trumps would remain standing. Asterisk, but illusions are fragile, and they depend on silence from those unwilling to challenge them directly. Into this landscape walked Jasmine Crockett, a voice not born of wealth or dynasty, but of struggle and authenticity.
How?
She did not fit the mold of carefully curated respectability politics. She was blunt, unapologetic, and unwilling to bow before power. To some, her sharp tone and relentless candor were weaknesses. Critics dismissed her as too raw, too brash, too easy, too caricature. But beneath the underestimation lay a truth her opponents refused to see. Crockett was unafraid. And in an age of political theater, fearlessness is a weapon. Her rise was not packaged by glossy magazine covers or cushioned by corporate boardrooms. It came from standing firm in spaces designed to silence women who looked and sounded like her. It came from cutting through rehearsed talking points with words that carried the weight of lived experience. And it came from a refusal to let the sheen of privilege define the boundaries of political power. In the years leading to this clash, Trump's dominance of the narrative seemed unshakable. His ability to turn attacks into fuel, his family's grip on branding, his iron sense of spectacle, all of it gave the impression of a fortress without cracks. Commentators, donors, even rivals grew used to the idea that Trump could not be rattled, that his family could not be flustered. That was the illusion of control. Power so deeply ingrained it felt untouchable. But illusions break at their weakest point. And sometimes it only takes one voice, unafraid to speak without permission, to expose how fragile the empire truly is. Jasmine Crockett was that voice. And when the moment arrived, when the stage lights hit and the cameras rolled, she would push against the carefully woven facade of Trump and Ivanka's control, and the world would watch to see if it held. The studio lights burned hot. The kind of glare that makes even seasoned politicians sweat beneath the collar. Cameras perched like hawks from every angle, feeding the moment to millions of screens across the country. In the control rooms, producers barked orders into headsets, already anticipating the clips that would dominate social media within minutes. Panelists shuffled papers, ready to pivot their talking points depending on who seized the upper hand. It wasn't just another debate segment. It was theater at the highest level, where reputations could be crushed in a single sentence. Donald Trump sat upright, his practiced scowl firmly in place. He thrived in these settings, often turning what should have been confrontations into rallies for his brand. Next to him, Ivanka radiated her signature composure, her smile polished, her posture impeccable. She whispered occasionally, the words too soft for the microphones, but obvious in intent. Stay calm, stay sharp, stay in control. Together, they looked like a dynasty bracing to remind the world why their grip on attention seemed unbreakable. Across from them, Jasmine Crockett adjusted her mic. She had been here before, interrupted, underestimated, drowned out by louder voices, and yet tonight felt different. The stakes were higher, the tension heavier. She had come armed not with rehearsed slogans, but with the kind of truth that cuts, through spin like glass, through silk. The weight of her presence was undeniable. Though the panel did what panels always do, they tried to minimize her. The interruptions came quickly. Trump scoffed, chuckled dismissively, leaned back in his chair with theatrical boredom. Panelists jumped in with pre-packaged questions meant to steer the conversation elsewhere. Even Ivanka interjected politely, her voice carrying the subtle edge of condescension, as though Crockett's turn to speak was a courtesy rather than a right. Every trick in the book was thrown her way, designed to chip at her resolve, to remind her of the pecking order, but Crockett did not flinch. She leaned forward, her voice steady, her words deliberate. Every attempt to derail her only seemed to sharpen her edge. She built her cadence slowly, step by step, like an attorney laying out evidence in front of a jury. She reminded the audience of the promises made, the betrayals ignored, the hypocrisy hidden beneath polished smiles. Each line pulled the tension tighter, like a rope about to snap. Then it happened. The bombshelled asterisk, she dropped it with the precision of someone who knew exactly how much damage it would cause. Her voice carried venom, but also clarity, cutting. Revelation that laid bare what Trump and Ivanka had worked so hard to conceal. The hypocrisy wasn't abstract anymore. It was alive, named undeniable. For a moment, the studio seemed to exhale, as if even the cameras needed to adjust their focus to capture the shock. Trump's eyes narrowed, his practiced confidence faltering for the briefest flicker of time. The scoff that usually followed. Attacks didn't come. Ivanka shifted in her seat, whispering urgently, her polished mask slipping at the edges. The panel froze, unsure whether to rush to commercial or let the spectacle unfold. Viewers at home felt it instantly, the unmistakable sense that they were witnessing something more than just political sparring. Asterisk, it was the point of no return. Once said, the words could not be unsaid. Once revealed, the truth could not be buried. Again, the illusion of control, the carefully maintained dominance of the Trump brand, was cracked open live on air. And in that moment, as millions leaned closer to their screens, it was Jasmine Crockett, not Trump. Not Ivanka who owned the stage. Asterisk, the silence that followed was louder than any applause, heavier than any insult. Everyone in that room and everyone watching across the country knew they had just crossed into a different story, one that could not be neatly rewritten or spun away. Asterisk, asterisk. Trump's first instinct was the same instinct that had carried him through decades of scandals: strike back. It's louder and harder than anyone else. His face twisted, the smirk gone, his hand chopping the air as he leaned forward to interrupt. He called her names, dismissed her as angry, accused her of fabricating, of performing for the cameras. He tried to laugh it off, the forced chuckle echoing hollowly in the studio, but the edges of his voice betrayed something he rarely allowed: too sure-rattled fear. Asterisk, for years, this strategy had worked. He had thrived on turning every accusation into a badge of victimhood, spinning criticism into proof of persecution. The formula was simple: paint himself as the target of witch hunts, rally his base with indignation, then redirect the story back to himself as the indestructible fighter. It was a cycle the media had played into countless times, chasing his provocations and feeding his dominance. Asterisk, but this time, the rhythm faltered. Crockett had not simply accused, she had exposed. The words lingered in the air, heavy and undeniable, their clarity leaving little room for deflection.
Ow.
Trump's interruptions came too fast, too shrill, less like a commanding showman and more like a man scrambling to plug holes in a sinking ship. His eyes darted not the confident stare of someone in control, but the flicker of someone calculating escape routes. Asterisk, Ivanka leaned in, her hand brushing his sleeve, her whisper sharp and urgent. She had perfected the role of mediator in moments like this, the calming daughter, the voice of reason, meant to restore the family's image. Her tone was measured, her phrasing smooth, but beneath the polish her nerves showed. She interjected to reframe Crockett's words as political theater, to remind the audience of her father's historic leadership, to paint the moment as a desperate stunt from a rising congresswoman. It was the language of PR designed to dull the blade that had just been driven into their narrative. Asterisk, but the blade didn't dull. Instead, Ivanka's composure cracked at the edges. The audience saw it in the way her smile faltered, in the tightness of her voice as she repeated the same lines, in the subtle shift from poise to defense. She was used to being the bridge between her father's chaos and the world's skepticism, the polished veneer that convinced moderates to look past the firestorms. But here, live on camera, her role felt less like a choice and more like desperation, like someone trying to sweep glass off the floor while the ceiling was still caving in. Asterisk, the empire, for all its spectacle, looked human in its unraveling. Trump's anger wasn't the triumphant kind that rallied a crowd. It was the kind that betrayed loss of control. His interruptions grew erratic, his voice louder, his gestures sharper. He tried to redirect the conversation, to throw Crockett off balance with personal jabs and accusations, but every swing landed weaker than the last. The more he fought, the more obvious the cracks became. Asterisk, and Ivanka once the flawless counterbalance began to look less like the polished air and more like a weary crisis manager. The tension in her jaw, the slight quiver when she tried to project calm, revealed just how much of their brand was held together by smoke and mirrors. The dynasty that had sold itself as untouchable was suddenly exposed as fragile, human, and cornered. Asterisk, for the audience, it was magnetic. People who had grown accustomed to Trump's dominance could not look away from the spectacle of him flailing, Ivanka struggling to hold the mask in place. It was not just a clash of personalities, it was the wobble of an empire that had built itself on invincibility. Asterisk, and Crockett. She sat steady, her expression unshaken. watching the unraveling like someone who knew the tide had turned. She didn't need to shout over Trump's interruptions. His desperation spoke louder than anything she could say. She didn't need to point out Ivanka's cracks. They showed themselves under the pressure of the moment. The stage belonged to her, not because she stole it, but because Trump and Ivanka had lost their grip on it. Asterisk in the span of minutes. The myth of control the Trumps had cultivated began to collapse. No spin could erase the visible panic. No rehearsed line could undo the tremor in Ivanka's voice. No insult could cover the flicker of fear in Trump's eyes. The family that had branded itself as unbreakable now looked cornered, scrambling, exposed. Asterisk, and if this was how they reacted to one voice, one revelation, one unflinching truth, then the question hung heavy for everyone watching. What else could bring this empire to its knees? Jasmine Crockett's rise was never scripted by a family fortune, never cushioned by the safety net of Dynasty. She came from the kind of background where nothing was handed to you, where every inch of progress was earned through grit, persistence, and the stubborn refusal to be silenced. Her story was not of privilege, but of perseverance, a story that resonated with the millions who felt unseen in a political system dominated by wealth and legacy. Asterisk. Long before her name trended on national broadcasts, Crockett built her reputation. In courtrooms and committee hearings, she was the voice who refused to soften her words for comfort, the attorney who would not bow to intimidation, the congresswoman who cut through doublespeak like a scalpel through fabric, where others mastered the art of vague promises and polished slogans. Crockett became known for her blunt candor, her ability to call out hypocrisy without hesitation. To her critics, it was abrasive. To her supporters, it was electrifying. Asterisk in a landscape where political theater often overshadowed truth, Crockett embodied something rare: authenticity. She did not perform for cameras, she confronted them. She did not cloak her language in layers of spin. She spoke directly in words that carried both anger and hope. That rawness, so often dismissed as a liability, was the very quality that made her impossible to ignore. Asterisk, and it was this authenticity that set her apart from the opponents across the stage. Trump's theatrics had long been his weapon, an endless parade of bluster, insults, and spectacle designed to dominate. Ivanka's image had been her shield, graceful, deliberate, meticulously crafted to project calm in the midst of chaos. Together, they were the embodiment of power curated for an audience, the dynasty built to perform authority. Crockett, by contrast, stood as the antithesis, unpolished, unapologetic, and unafraid to show the raw humanity that her opponents so carefully concealed. Asterisk. The dynamic was almost biblical in its simplicity. Trump and Ivanka, the Goliaths of modern political spectacle, carried every advantage: wealth, fame, influence, media reach. Crockett was the David, armed not with resources or dynasty, but with truth and the courage to wield it. The imbalance of power made the clash all the more riveting. A single voice facing down a machine built to crush dissent. Asterisk, her courage was not theatrical. It was lived. It came from battles fought in rooms where she was underestimated, from the constant pressure of being told to tone it down, to wait her turn, to follow the script written by those in power. Each time she refused, each time she spoke anyway, she sharpened the edge that now cut into the heart of the Trump facade. Asterisk, and the people watching felt it. For immigrants who had been told to stay quiet, for women of color whose voices were too often dismissed, for working-class families who had been ignored by political dynasties, Crockett's defiance was validation. She carried their frustration into the spotlight, not cloaked in polite phrases, but shouted in clarity that could not be ignored. She was not just speaking for herself. She was speaking for everyone who had been pushed aside by systems designed to silence them. Asterisk, it is easy to underestimate someone who does not play by the rules of the game. That was Trump's mistake. That was Ivanka's blind spot. And that was the illusion shattering before the eyes of millions. Crockett was not there to be another prop in their performance. She was there to break the script, to drag truth into a theater designed for spectacle, and to remind the audience that courage often looks messy, raw, even confrontational. But it is courage all the same. And so, as Trump fumed and Ivanka faltered, Crockett's presence only grew. She did not need Dynasty. She did not need a machine. She needed only her voice and the conviction that it mattered. In that studio, in that moment, she transformed from a rising congresswoman into something larger, a symbol of resistance. A modern David standing unflinching before political Goliath. The imbalance of power made the clash electric. And the longer the cameras rolled, the clearer it became that this was not just another skirmish. It was the beginning of a story that would echo far beyond the studio walls. The studio had become an arena, and every second was another strike in a battle too raw to script. Trump lunged first, his voice booming over the moderator, accusing Crockett of slander, of making things up to get attention. He jabbed with nicknames, tossed barbs meant to belittle her presence, each insult crafted to reduce her to a sideshow. The old rhythm of dominance mock, interrupt, overwhelm poured out of him like muscle memory. But Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. She leaned in, steady. Her voice slicing through his volume with clarity that carried more weight than noise. She repeated her point, sharper this time, daring him to deny it on live television. The audience gasped at her precision. The panelists stumbled over their notes, unsure whether to step in or stay out of a fight that was clearly bigger than them. Trump struck again, pounding the table with open palms, demanding to speak over her. He laughed, but the laughter sounded strained, hollow, a man forcing performance where instinct had always come easy. For years he had been the ringmaster, the one who turned chaos into applause. But tonight, the applause wasn't coming. Instead, the tension grew tighter. The crowd at home, leaning forward to witness what had once seemed impossible, Donald Trump on the defensive. Ivanka jumped in, her words smoother, her tone dipped in practiced calm. She tried to reframe, to cloak the family brand in sophistication. "Let's not indulge in baseless accusations," she said, her smile rehearsed, her cadence deliberate. But Crockett met her with the same fire, turning politely delivered spin into evidence of a facada, cracking. "You can dress up corruption in pearls," Crockett fired back, "but it's still corruption." The line landed like a hammer, studio reverberating with its weight. Commentators watching from satellite feeds fumbled to keep up. Some stammered about decorum, others gasped at the audacity. But all of them recognized what was happening. A clash far greater than talking points. This wasn't politics as performance, it was performance undone by truth. The screen no longer framed Trump and Ivanka as untouchable, framed them as vulnerable, scrambling to regain footing. The interruptions grew frantic. Trump barked. About ratings, about witch hunts, about conspiracies stacked against him. His words spilled faster, less coherent, less calculated. Each jab came with less precision, more desperation, a fighter swinging wild as the crowd sensed the blood in the water. Ivanka's smile tightened, her interjections becoming repetitive, mechanical, the polish slipping into panic. She spoke of dignity, of family, of resilience. But her voice wavered just enough for the cameras to catch. And through it all, Crockett stood unyielding. Every attack she absorbed, she turned back twice as sharp. Every attempt to drown her out only amplified her clarity. Her cadence grew deliberate, steady. The rhythm of someone who knew she did not need to shout to be heard. Each time Trump tried to silence her, she waited, then delivered another blow. Her words landing heavier because they were controlled, because they were deliberate. The studio felt alive with electricity. The audience didn't clap, but there. Silence spoke louder, the silence of people watching a battle where something monumental was shifting. Even the moderator, usually the referee of chaos, looked more like a spectator caught in the tide. Powerless to rein in the energy surging across the stage, psychological cracks became impossible to ignore. Trump's brand, built on the image, of the unshakable fighter now showed the unthinkable. Retreat. His eyes darted toward producers. His face reddened beyond its usual bluster. His words devolved into repetition. Ivanka's veneer, once so smooth it seemed untouchable, wavered as her smile hardened into a mask. The dynasty that thrived on spectacle was suddenly trapped in it, unable to rewrite the narrative unfolding live. Asterisk for Crockett. This was not just survival. It was ascension. Each line she delivered elevated her stature. Each refusal to yield transformed her from a participant into the central force of the night.
Active.
She was not reacting to Trump and Ivanka. They were reacting to her. She had shifted, the gravitational pull of the stage, dragging the spotlight toward herself through sheer resolve. Asterisk, it was gladiatorial in its rhythm. Blow, counterblow, the roar of tension filling the silence between. But unlike the staged battles of the past, this fight exposed something real. It revealed what the Trumps feared most, that control was not invincible, that performance could be punctured, that truth delivered without apology could cut through. Years of spectacle. Asterisk, and when Crockett finally paused, when she let her words hang heavy in the silent stretch, it was not Trump's laughter or Ivanka's composure that filled the void. It was the weight of a new reality settling over the stage. The empire was wobbling, and the woman they tried to sideline was now the one holding center court. Asterisk, the clash was not finished, not even close, but the balance had shifted. Everyone watching knew it. Asterisk, the tide turned suddenly, when with it came the suffocating weight of the Trump machine pressing down on every inch of the stage. Trump leaned forward, voice rising into a near shout, repeating her name with mocking inflection, burying her words beneath layers of ridicule. Every sentence Crockett tried to form was smothered by interruptions. Gear's accusations hurled rapid fire, with no space for clarity. It was not debate, it was domination by volume, the sheer brute force of a man who had made his career drowning opponents in noise. Asterisk, Ivanka joined in. Her calm veneer sharpened into something colder, condescending in its certainty. She framed Crockett's accusations as emotional theatrics, scolding her with polished precision, dismissing her not as an equal opponent, but as a disruptor beneath their station. The words dripped with dismissal, like a parent humoring a child. For viewers sympathetic to Crockett, it cut deep proof of how Dynasty's weaponized polish to silence authenticity. Asterisk, and it worked, at least for a moment. The camera feeds began to tilt away, showing the panelists shifting uncomfortably. Commentators in split screens preparing to reframe the narrative. In newsrooms across the country, producers debated whether to cut away from the escalating chaos. Some already began mocking Crockett in real time, treating her defiance as desperation, her truth as hysteria. Social media filled with snide commentary, memes crafted on the spot to reduce her words into a punchline before they could fully land. Asterisk, the energy in the studio shifted. What had begun as a clash now felt like an onslaught. Crockett's voice, though steady, seemed to fight against a tidal wave of noise. Trump pounded the table, raising his voice louder and louder, accusing her of lying, of grandstanding, of being irrelevant. Ivanka smiled tightly, interrupting with phrases rehearsed for maximum dismissal. With all due respect, let's be serious. Everyone knows that isn't true. Each phrase pressed Crockett further toward the margins, trying to erase the force she had built only minutes before. Asterisk for the audience at home, the despair was palpable. It felt as though history was repeating itself, the same spectacle of power, overwhelming truth. The same family dynasty bending reality through sheer force of presence. Crockett's words, so sharp and undeniable at first, were now being buried beneath the avalanche of spin and derision. The imbalance of power had returned to full view. A lone congresswoman versus a media-savvy empire that thrived on humiliation. As a weapon, asterisk commentators piled on, some mocking her tone, others sighing about decorum, as though the real offense was not hypocrisy, but the audacity of calling it out. A few nervously laughed, trying to diffuse the tension with jokes that only trivialized her presence further. The narrative was slipping. In real time, Crockett was being framed not as the truth-teller, but as the disruptor, the spectacle. the one out of control. Asterisk, for a chilling moment, it seemed as though the bombshell would fade into nothing more than another outburst swallowed by the endless churn of spectacle. Trump's confidence, rattled earlier, now seemed to swell back as he dominated the noise. Ivanka's mask of composure reattached itself, her words flowing with renewed certainty. The Dynasty was recalibrating, regrouping, reminding the audience why they had remained untouchable for so long. Asterisk Crockett's lips moved, her words still sharp, but the noise smothered them. Her figure on the screen seemed smaller, the odds stacked so heavily that even her resolve might not be enough to break through. The weight of despair pressed down on every viewer who had dared to believe she could win this moment. Asterisk, for the first time, it looked as though courage might not be enough. Asterisk. Crockett could feel the tide pressing against her, every jeer and interruption tightening like a vice around her voice. The noise was deafening, the dismissals relentless, the panelists already shifting the narrative away from her revelation. It would have been easy, save for it, to let the moment pass, to resign herself to the inevitability of the Trump machine reclaiming control, but that was not why she had come. Asterisk, she straightened in her chair, refusing to shrink. Her eyes locked forward, her voice cutting through the chaos with the sharpness of steel on stone. She repeated the bombshell, word for word, not softening, not retreating. Only this time she stripped it of any excess, delivering it like a blade honed to perfection. Every syllable landed heavy, unignorable, daring anyone to dismiss it now. Asterisk Trump barked louder than before, his voice fraying with anger. "Lies," he shouted, pounding the desk, his gestures flailing. But Crockett's gamble was not to compete with his volume. It was to command silence through clarity. She raised her voice just enough to steady above the noise, her cadence deliberate, her eyes unwavering. She reframed the truth in sharper terms, cutting off escape routes, boxing Trump and Ivanka into a corner where denial only exposed them further. Asterisk, the panel froze. Commentators, who seconds earlier had mocked, stumbled into silence. Even the producers in the control room hesitated, unwilling to cut away when they knew they were watching a moment that would replay endlessly on every feed, every timeline. Every screen in America? Asterisk, Ivanka leaned forward, her polished composure cracking with urgency. She whispered frantically to her father, interjecting with deflections, trying to cloud Crockett's words with phrases about partisanship and political attacks. But the precision of Crockett's framing left little room to maneuver. Every attempt at spin sounded rehearsed, hollow, fragile, asterisk, and then it happened. The silence. Not from Trump, who still fumed, nor from Ivanka, who tried desperately to redirect, but from the room itself. The audience in the studio leaned in, breathless. The commentators held back, their chatter muted by the gravity of what had just been said. Even supporters who had cheered Trump's dominance fell quiet, forced to reckon with words to clear, to direct, to wave away. Asterisk, the gamble had worked. By risking ridicule, by repeating what they wanted buried, Crockett had forced the truth into daylight, where no amount of noise could hide it. She had turned the very tactic meant to silence her into her weapon. Holding steady until the weight of her words carved out space for themselves, Asterisk Trump's fury only underscored the loss of control. His face reddened, his gestures wild, his voice spiraling into incoherence. Every outburst that once commanded attention now seemed like desperation, the roar of a man losing ground. Ivanka's mask slipped further, her smile brittle, her reassurances sounding like rehearsed lines spoken by someone who knew they weren't landing. Asterisk. Crockett's presence filled the void. She didn't shout, she didn't flail. She sat in the storm with the calm of someone who knew she had landed the blow and that no amount of noise could take it back. Her gamble had not only revived her message, it had shifted the battlefield. No longer was she the challenger trying to break through. She was the center of gravity, the one dictating the terms of the moment. Asterisk, the silence lingered. And in that silence, power shifted. What began as a desperate attempt to overwhelm her had backfired, exposing the Dynasty not as untouchable, but as vulnerable. Against all odds, Crockett had forced the nation to hear her. And once heard, her words could not be unheard. Asterisk the moment. The cameras cut, the battle spilled into every screen across the nation. Clips of Crockett's words, sharp, unflinching, undeniable, began replaying on loop. Networks that had once debated cutting away now leaned in, milking the confrontation. For every ounce of spectacle, headlines flashed with the bombshell she'd refused to let die. And Trump's furious meltdown played side by side with Ivanka's faltering attempts to hold the facade together. The dynasty looked shaken, human, fallible. Asterisk on social media. The clash went viral with a speed that stunned even seasoned strategists. Hashtags trended globally within the hour. Supporters of Crockett clipped her words into rallying cries, while Trump loyalists scrambled to spin the chaos into victimhood, claiming she had been disrespectful or out of control. But the raw footage told a different story, one of a lone congresswoman refusing to be silenced, standing her ground against a political empire that had built its power on spectacle. Asterisk. The catharsis for her supporters was undeniable. For once, the dynasty hadn't walked away unscathed. For once, the noise hadn't swallowed the truth whole. Crockett's resolve had cut through, and the victory felt electric proof that courage, even from an underdog, could shake giants. Viewers who had felt invisible saw themselves in her defiance. Immigrants, working-class families, women of color, millions recognized in her the reflection of their own struggles to be heard. Asterisk, yet beneath the triumph, shadows stretched. The dynasty was wounded, but not defeated. Trump's anger, once a weapon, now hardened into a promise of vengeance. Ivanka's poise, though cracked, recalibrated quickly. Within hours, carefully worded statements and polished interviews attempted to reframe the narrative, painting Crockett as reckless and performative. Media allies rallied to their defense, trying to turn the story from their unraveling into her supposed disrespect. Asterisk, the backlash was immediate. Online mobs swarmed Crockett's accounts, threats pouring in with the velocity of a system designed to punish defiance. Political opponents seized the moment to attack, amplifying every insult, every smear. Her triumph had elevated her, but it had also painted a target on her back. She had won the night, but in doing so, she had declared open war with a dynasty that never forgot a slight. Asterisk, and that was the paradox of her victory. Undeniable, yet costly. The image of Trump's red-faced fury and Ivanka's breaking composure would be remembered, replayed, weaponized. But so too would the storm that followed the tidal wave of backlash. The attempts to discredit the machinery grinding into motion to bury her. Asterisk still. In the eyes of those who had watched live, who had felt the silence when her words finally landed, the moment could not be undone. Crockett had not only stood her ground, she had shifted the stage itself. She had proven that truth could survive the noise, that authenticity could break through polish, that courage could stare down. Dynasty. Asterisk, it was a victory, yes, but the story was unfinished. The clash was not the end. It was ignition. The dynasty would regroup, Crockett would brace, and the nation would watch. Knowing this confrontation had set the stage for battles far greater than one explosive night on live television. Asterisk, the war had only just begun. Asterisk, in the days that followed, the clash was no longer just about Crockett, Trump, or Ivanka. It had crystallized into something larger, cultural mirror reflecting the fault lines of a nation. On one side stood the machinery of dynasty, polished spin, inherited power, spectacle wielded like a weapon. On the other stood raw authenticity, the kind that refused to be buried beneath noise, for millions. Crockett's stand was not just a debate moment, it was a declaration that truth could still fight its way to daylight. Asterisk commentators dissected the footage frame by frame, pointing to the exact second Trump's fury slipped from dominance into desperation, the precise moment Ivanka's polish cracked into panic. Those images became more than viral clips. They became symbols of vulnerability in a family long believed untouchable. For the first time, the empire looked less like destiny and more like something fragile, capable of fracture. Asterisk, meanwhile, Crockett's profile soared. She was no longer just another voice in the chamber. She was a symbol of fearless confrontation. a living embodiment of what it meant to stare down power without blinking. Supporters rallied around her not simply because she had spoken the truth, but because she had refused to let that truth be smothered. She had gambled everything on the idea that clarity could cut through chaos, and she had won. Yet victory carried its shadow. The dynasty did not forgive, and it did not forget. Every word she spoke afterward would be scrutinized, every move dissected, every misstep amplified. Her moment of triumph had painted her into history, but it had also marked her as a target. The storm she had ignited would not fade, it would grow. Fueled by the rage of those she had dared to expose, still, for a generation watching, the legacy was sealed. This was the night the facade cracked. This was the night authenticity went toe-to-toe with Dynasty and left a scar. Years from now, people would look back at that freeze frame of Trump fuming, Ivanka whispering, Crockett unyielding, and know, it was not just television. It was the sound of an empire wobbling. And if this was just the opening round, what comes next will shake the nation even harder. Asterisk.